Hi everyone, it's Michelle. Welcome back. So today I thought I would come on and talk about the books I've been reading. It's been a couple weeks since I last updated you, and I've gone through 4 books, so I thought we could talk about them briefly today. So let's jump right in and get started. The first book I actually don't have with me because I checked it out from my local library. I actually went through the trouble of going to my library and seeing how it would be. I checked out a couple books and read them, and one of them I'm going to talk about today. And that is called The Dinner by Herman Koch, I believe is how you say his name. So here's what the book looks like. Try and get it without the glare. And I'll read you a blurb from the book. So I believe this was a German author. This book was a New York Times bestseller. It did very well all over the world. You know, translated in many languages, that kind of thing. I think it's a couple years old, maybe. I will read a blurb from it and then I'll talk a little bit about it. I will say that, you know, on the front cover it says a European Gone Girl, which for me, it wasn't quite that for me. It was a good book, but it wasn't quite that. So let me read you the synopsis and then I'll talk about what I thought of the book. Okay, so an internationally best-selling phenomenon, the darkly suspenseful, highly controversial tale of 2 families struggling to make the hardest decision of their lives, all over the course of one meal, which is why it's called The Dinner. So the story is told during the courses of the meal. So like there's an appetizer chapter where, you know, they'll talk about the food and then they'll get into the story and that kind of thing. It's a summer's evening in Amsterdam and 2 couples meet at a fashionable restaurant for dinner. Between mouthfuls of food and over the scrapings of cutlery, the conversation remains a gentle hum of polite discourse. But behind the empty words, terrible things need to be said, and with every forced smile and every new course, the knives are being sharpened. Each couple has a 15-year-old son. The 2 boys are united by their accountability for a single horrific act. An act that has triggered a police investigation and shattered the comfortable, insulated worlds of the families. As the dinner reaches its culinary climax, the conversation finally touches on their children. As civility and friendship disintegrate, each couple shows just how far they are prepared to go to protect the ones they love. Skewering everything from parenting values to pretentious menus to political convictions, this novel reveals the dark side of genteel society and asks what each of us would do in the face of an unimaginable tragedy. So, the story, first of all, it's an interesting way to tell the story, right? Throughout a meal, these 2 couples are gathered to talk about sort of what they think they need to do about their situation. I will say this synopsis says, you know, what would each of us do in the face of an unimaginable tragedy? I don't think what happened is a tragedy. I think, you know, the 2 sons did something horrible, and the parents are trying to decide what to do about it. They know what happened, and you know, the sons know they know, but the police don't know who's responsible for what happened, and the parents are trying to decide what to do about it. Do they tell and let the boys be punished, you know, to kind of throw themselves on the mercy of the court, or do they continue to hide it, and how do they do that? And one of the gentlemen, the families are related. I think the boys are cousins, so I think the dads are brothers, I'm pretty sure, and one of the fathers has political aspirations, so he's running for a public office. He's going to be running for a public office, and so you know, he has some thoughts because of that as well. And I will say it was a really interesting story. It was well written. I think that the concept of the story was interesting because this is something that could truly happen. I would give this book 3 stars, and here's why. Normally I might rate it a little bit higher, but my problem was I didn't like any of these people, any of them. This book speaks a lot about class and how certain classes feel about other classes, and you know, how the rich, and this is very general, but you know, how sometimes the rich think they're better than people who, you know, aren't wealthy, or, you know, the very poor, destitute, you know, people living on the streets, and how differently they feel about them, and how they, you know, how rich people feel like you can treat these homeless people however you want, and it's okay. And so, or maybe it's not okay, but it isn't as bad because this person was a homeless person. And so it spoke a lot about class, and none of the characters were very likable. So because of kind of how they felt about some of that stuff. So it's a really good story. I might, like, this book may have pulled my heartstrings a little bit more if I were a parent, because I think as a parent you might feel differently. If your child had committed such an act, how would you feel? Like, would you feel the pull to protect your child at all costs, or would you want your child to have to take responsibility for what they did? And I don't have that experience to sort of have that struggle within myself as a reader. So, good book, but I would recommend the book. It was I liked the book. I'm going to give it 3 full stars, but I didn't like the characters very much. So that is The Dinner by Herman Koch. And it's K-O-C-H is how you spell his name. I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Koch. Okay, so let's get to the books, the other books that I read that are in front of me. The next book I read was, this is a great book. It is called Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. This is sort of a, I will read you the blurb, but this is sort of a comedy. It's a fiction, comedy, family story kind of thing. So, and lots of the blurbs on here talk about how witty and hysterical and adventurously funny and that kind of thing. So, when 15-year-old Bee claims a family trip to Antarctica as a reward for perfect grades, her fiercely intelligent but agoraphobic mother, Bernadette, throws herself into preparations for the trip. Worn down by years of trying to live the Seattle life she never wanted, Bernadette is on the brink of a meltdown. As disaster follows disaster, she disappears, leaving her family to pick up the pieces. Which is exactly what Bee does. So Bee is the daughter. Weaving together emails, invoices, and school memos to reveal the secret past that Bernadette has been hiding for decades. Where'd You Go, Bernadette is an ingeniously entertaining novel about a family coming to terms with who they are and the power of a daughter's love for her imperfect mother. This was first of all, hysterically funny. You know, this is about a woman who is afraid to leave her home and doesn't like to interact with people. And they live in a very wealthy neighborhood in Seattle. And in their neighborhood, people interact together, but she does not. This family does not, because the mother is a little bit, doesn't like that. And so they all think she's kind of wacky. And this is a story about what happens to her. A couple interesting things about this. The way this book is written, it is, so the story is told through some narrative. So Bee, the daughter, there's narrative by Bee mostly. And then there are emails and memos and letters and stuff between all kinds of people. So in the beginning, it is between Bernadette and her personal assistant. So she hires a personal assistant from India who makes very little money, and they email everything, and the person from India takes care of all of her business for her. And so there's lots of that going back and forth, so you can understand what Bernadette's trying to do. And then there's emails and stuff between the neighbors and different people at the school and her husband and his assistant. And so the story is told through that process. So there's some narrative, and then there's all these emails, and so as you're learning the story, you're reading emails from one person to another, so you can kind of understand what's happening. And basically, you know, they promise her that they will take her on whatever trip she wants if in this year of school she gets perfect grades. And she does. And so she says, I want to go to Antarctica. And so they say, well, we have to take her. And the mother is a little bit freaking out because she doesn't like to leave the house. And so she's, you know, trying to pull it together for Bee, because she loves her daughter and she wants to give her this. And it's sort of, you know, but she's falling apart because of it. And her husband thinks she's really falling apart. And so he tries to step in and do some things. And the whole thing blows up, and Bernadette disappears. Just disappears. And down the road, the dad and the daughter decide they're going to go to Antarctica anyway. And it's during that process that Bee discovers how to find her mother. And because she is the one who never gave up on her mother. which it was a great story. I mean, the things that happen in this book are hilarious, but they're things that could really happen. And, you know, sort of the whole story about what really happened to the mom, and Bernadette, or Bea, never giving up on her mother. And Bernadette was a famous architect at one point, but, you know, once she moved to Seattle, she kind of became a recluse. And when people discover who she is, then, you know, more things happen and that kind of thing. So this was a very touching, very funny novel to read. And it's also a little bit of a mystery because Bernadette disappears and Bea is trying to find her. So I highly, highly recommend this book. It's very well written, and it's, like I said, it's an interesting read because a lot of it is, you know, letters and emails and that kind of thing, and so you're kind of putting the story together that way. So highly recommend Where'd You Go, Bernadette. Okay, then the last two books are both mysteries. Well, kind of mysteries, I guess. This first one, I read A Small Indiscretion by Jan Ellison. I think this is a relatively new book, maybe. So this was recommended to me by, 2014, so not too new, by one of the women who works in the bookstore that I shop at. So I will read you a blurb. At 19, Annie Black trades a bleak future in a washed-out California town for a London winter of drinking and abandon. 20 years later, she is a San Francisco lighting designer and happily married mother of 3 who has put her reckless youth behind her. Then, a photo from that distant winter in Europe arrives inexplicably in her mailbox, and an old obsession is awakened. Past and present collide, Annie's marriage falters, and her son takes a car ride that ends with his life hanging in the balance. Now, Annie must fight for her family by untangling the mysteries of the turbulent winter that drew an invisible map of her future. A Small Indiscretion announces a major new voice in literary suspense as it unfolds a story of denial, love, forgiveness, and one woman's reckoning with her own fateful mistakes. So, I think that over-describes the book a little bit. So, you know, this is a book about this woman went away at 20, spent a winter working in London, doing the things 20-year-olds do. Yes, she was involved in a little bit more than maybe most 20-year-olds do, but it isn't like she went over there and killed somebody or something. But there was some interesting things that happened. Then she comes back she meets someone over there, comes back to California, gets married. Yeah, they're in California. They get married, they have 3 children, they're raising their 3 children, and a picture, someone mails a picture to her of her and some of the people she knew back then, but there's no return address or anything like that. And she just kind of tucks the picture away, but it just gets her thinking about the things that happened back then and what might have been. And then during this time, you know, her son is in a horrific accident. She has the opportunity to go to London to do a lighting show because she's like a famous lighting designer. And while she's there, she decides to go find one of the people that she knew back then. And, you know, she has a little fling with him, and then she comes back and she's trying to figure out how to put her life back together. And so it was good. You got to learn about, like, her crazy life back when she was 20 and some of the things she got herself into. And then, you know, now as her family is struggling to be a family because of everything that's happened, not just because of this indiscretion. You know, her son is in a coma. She's angry about why. She thinks that's her fault. And then when he comes out of the coma, they're trying to figure out, you know, how to get him away from... There's all kinds of things happening. And she has to deal with her past to help bring everything to a conclusion. So it was a good book. I would give it 3 stars. I liked it. It was interesting. It was a good read. But, you know, it wasn't sort of high drama for me, that kind of thing. This is something I think that could happen easily in the world, so I don't think it's that far off. And I think it's just about a woman who's struggling with her past and her present, and, you know, as we go through maybe a little bit of a midlife crisis, she's trying to deal with all of that. So it was interesting, but I don't know, it's just okay for me. Okay, and lastly, I read Christine Falls by Benjamin Black. So this is a mystery. I will read you a couple of blurbs. So the blurb on the front says, a dark, ambitious crime novel. It is going to make more than a few readers flip the book over to look at the author photo to make sure Banville's really pulling the strings. So Benjamin Black is a pen name for John Banville, I believe his name is. Yeah, John Banville. And I think his other books maybe aren't like these dark kind of mysteries, and so that's what that blurb is about. But I also, this came as a recommendation from the woman who works in the bookstore that I shop at. So I asked her for a mystery that maybe had some dark undertones to it. And she said that Benjamin Black writes this series about a pathologist, Mr. Quirk, and this is the first book in that series. So I will read you what the book is about. The hero of Christine Falls, Quirk, is a surly pathologist living in 1950s Dublin. One night, after having a few drinks at a party, he returns to the morgue to find his brother-in-law tampering with the records of a young woman's corpse. The next morning, when his hangover has worn off, Quirk begins looking into the woman's history. He discovers a plot that spans 2 continents, implicates the Catholic Church, and may just involve members of his own family. He is warned, first subtly, then violently, to lay off. But Quirk is a stubborn man. The first novel in the Quirk series brings all of the vividness and psychological insight of John Banville's writing to the dark, menacing atmosphere of a first-class thriller. So, this is a great mystery. Great mystery. You know, this is about a pathologist. He is a very surly, drunken character that he has a lot of flaws, but he is a pathologist, and he stumbles on his brother-in-law altering the records of a dead girl in the morgue. His brother-in-law is a physician, so a doctor, used to dealing with patients, and he you know, he's drunk, he comes back from a Christmas party and finds him in there altering the records. And instead of, you know, confronting him, he just decides to start looking into what's going on. Christine Falls is the name of the girl, the dead girl. And so that's why the book's called Christine Falls. Now, so he starts investigating what's going on, and, you know, there is a, you know, seedy element that tries to, you know, scare him from continuing his investigation by beating him up and that kind of thing. And he doesn't give up, and he keeps pursuing it. And, you know, he learns a lot about family secrets in here. Obviously, his brother-in-law is involved. You learn a lot about him. First you think it's a family secret, then you realize it isn't, and, you know, he goes from, so this is written in the 50s. It involves the Catholic Church. It involves, you know, girls who get in trouble. So back in the 50s, when you ended up pregnant and you were not married, a lot of girls went off to places to have the child and then leave the child there and then come back to their lives. And it is a story a little bit about that. And it, you know, it is about Dublin, and then it ends up in Boston. So it's a very interesting, well-told story. The prose in this book is beautiful. So John Banville, Benjamin Black, whatever you want to call him, he writes beautiful, beautiful prose. And the book is very good. I like reading mysteries that involve the Catholic Church as well, because I find that I don't know, you know, I was raised a Catholic. I grew up a Catholic. So the church, and, you know, as we read more and more about the power that the church has and how they misuse that power a lot, it's interesting to read mysteries about it because they're so powerful that they're a little bit scary. And so when you read stories that involve them, it's a little frightening because of how powerful they are. So this was a really good book, and I will read more in this series because I liked the character, Mr. Quirk. I liked the character. I liked some of the other characters that in his family that were introduced in this book, and I assume some of them will play roles in the next stories as well. I think there are 7, maybe 7 in this series or something already. So this one was obviously written a long time ago, but when the person at the bookstore was telling me about this, you know, she said, I recommend you start with the first one because it's going to give a lot of background on who he is and who his family is and that kind of thing. So I'm really glad I started with the first one. But this book is really, really good. I would give this this book 4 stars. Nothing really gets 5 stars for me unless it's a book that I can't let go of and I'm going to keep it. So 4 stars is a really, really high rating for me. It was a really good tale. You didn't really know what was going to happen. There was a lot of different stories going on at the same time in this book that all sort of come together in the end. And I don't typically like stories that are written, you know, I don't typically read a lot of, not that this is historical fiction because it's the 50s, but this was really, really good, and it played well. You know, it had to be set in the 50s for, you know, kind of what's going on to go on, but it was really, really well written, and it was a really good mystery. So if you haven't read any of Benjamin Black's books, I highly recommend you start with Christine Falls. Excuse me. Very, very good story. So those are the 4 books that I read over the last couple weeks. Hopefully you found this helpful. Let us know in the comments if you've read any of these and what you thought, especially if you read Where'd You Go, Bernadette, or Christine Falls, because these I thought were really good books. This Where'd You Go, Bernadette for me is 4 stars leading to 5 because I loved the characters. I was rooting for the, you know, the young girl looking for her mom, never giving up on her mother. I love that. And Christine Falls was a fantastic mystery. So if you've read it, either one of those, let us know what you thought. Also share anything that you've been reading and that you find is fantastic. Share that with us in the comments. Again, please, spoiler free. That is it for today. I hope everybody's having a fantastic day, and I will talk to you all again soon.